My mother demanded I cancel my graduation banquet and give my $50,000 scholarship money to my sister's celebration. When I refused, she threw coffee at my shirt in front of the entire hall. Then the dean walked in and revealed the secret I'd been hiding since freshman year. My name is Micah. I am 22 years old, graduating this afternoon with a degree in chemical engineering. This is the story of a lab notebook, a patent I filed when I was 19, 4 years of licensing negotiations I never mentioned to my family, and a Tuesday morning in May when my mother threw a vending machine coffee at my dress shirt in the middle of the university banquet hall. She thought the $50,000 was a scholarship. She was wrong about what I do. I study chemical engineering. More specifically, I study how materials fail, how a polymer chain breaks down under stress, where the pressure concentrates, what the molecular structure looked like before it gave out. My freshman year, I found something in the lab that Dr. Vera Marsh said was worth filing. I was 19 years old. I signed the paperwork in her office on a Thursday afternoon in November, and then I went to the dining hall and ate dinner alone and did not tell anyone. For 4 years after that, a team of university lawyers had been negotiating a licensing deal with a materials company around my name. The deal finalized 8 weeks before graduation. The first royalty payment was $50,000, with projected additional royalties of approximately $212,000 over the following 5 years, pending contract terms. The banquet today was the university's announcement event. Dean Hollis was scheduled to speak at 11:30. My mother thought the university had given me the money because I was a good student. She did not know what I had made. She did not know what a patent was. She did not know my name had been in a licensing contract since I was a sophomore, or that Dr. Vera Marsh had been copying me on legal correspondence for 4 years that I read and responded to from my dorm room without mentioning any of it at Thanksgiving. I kept it quiet because the moment I did not keep it quiet, it would enter my family's system of expectations and opinions and redistribution, and I had seen that system operate on everything I ever had, and I was not ready for it to operate on this. The coffee changed my calculation. Not the money. The coffee. Now she was not on the guest list. The banquet was a department event. Chemical engineering seniors, graduate students, faculty, and the licensing representatives from the materials company who had flown in from Chicago for the announcement. I had submitted the guest list myself, which included Dr. Vera Marsh, my thesis advisor, Professor Kalos, my roommate from junior year, and 3 classmates I had worked closely with in the research lab. My mother's name was not on it. Neither was Paige's. They appeared in the doorway of the banquet hall at 10:43 and with the specific energy of people who have come with a plan and are locating their target. My mother was in her navy church dress, the one she wore to occasions she wanted to be taken seriously at. Paige was behind her in something cream-colored. They were both scanning the room. I was standing near the registration table talking to Professor Kalos about the postdoctoral application I had submitted to the department when I saw them. I had time to register what was happening, to understand that the visit was intentional and that it had a purpose. Before my mother's eyes found me across the room and she started moving. She did not look at the banquet setup. She did not look at the university banner or the formal table arrangements or the name placards for the licensing executives that specified their titles and the name of the company they represented. She walked toward me with the directness of someone who has been building toward this conversation in the car and does not want to lose momentum. Professor Kalos clocked the shift in my expression and excused himself quietly. I appreciated that. She said, "We need to talk." Outside, I told her the banquet started in 45 minutes and there were people I needed to be available for. She said outside did not take 45 minutes. Across the room, Dr. Vera Marsh had stopped her conversation with the licensing council and was watching us. She had a particular stillness when she was assessing a situation, a quality I had learned to read over 4 years of working with her, and the stillness she was currently deploying was the kind that precedes a decision. I said, "Mom, what's going on?" She told me about Paige's venue deposit. She told me in full in the middle of the banquet hall with her voice at the volume she used when she felt her point was being questioned before she had finished making it. The deposit was $18,400. The venue had a cancellation and could hold it for 2 weeks. Paige had been planning this wedding since Harold had started talking about it, since before he got sick, since back when they all still thought the money would be there. Harold was gone, and the money he had saved for this was gone with him, spent on the last 2 years of bills that the insurance had not covered and the savings had run out covering. She said Paige had already been through enough. She said Paige deserved this. She said I had gotten $50,000 from the university and Paige had gotten nothing, and their father would have wanted me to help. I said, Mom, that's not what that money is. She said, I know what it is. You're a good student, and they gave it to you as a scholarship. Paige is just as smart, and nobody gave her anything. I looked at Paige, who had moved slightly to the left of where she had been standing, and was looking at a point somewhere between the floor and the middle distance. The look of someone who is hoping a situation resolves itself without requiring them to be the one who resolves it. I said, this is not where we should be having this conversation. She said, you won't answer my calls. Where should we be having it? This was partly fair. I had answered 2 calls in the previous week and declined 9. The 2 I had answered had been about the same thing, and my answer had been the same on both of them. I could not give Paige $18,000 of money that was not available to be given away. She had called 9 more times, and I had not answered 9 more times, because the 9th call would have the same answer as the first, and I had a licensing announcement to prepare for, and I did not have the bandwidth for 11 versions of the same conversation. She reached into her purse. I had not noticed until this moment that she was holding a coffee cup, the kind from a vending machine, the pressed cardboard sleeve, the plastic lid with the small sip opening. She had been holding it the whole time. She had been holding it in the doorway when they arrived. She had been holding it in the car. She had come here with a coffee cup in her hand, which told me more about how the morning had gone than anything she had said. She said, you got lucky. Your sister needs this. Give it back. Give it back. As though the university had lent me something that had always belonged to someone else. I said, it's not a scholarship. She said, I know what a scholarship is, Micah. I said, I know you do. But this isn't one. She said, your father would be ashamed of what you're doing right now. She threw the coffee. Then, freshman year, the lab where I made the discovery was on the 3rd floor of the chemistry building, room 314, which I knew the way you know a room you have spent more hours in than your own dorm room. It smelled like isopropanol and the specific plasticky smell of the ventilation hood when it had been running for hours. And it was the only place on campus where I consistently lost track of time without noticing. I was there most weeknights after dinner and most Saturday afternoons, and I told my mother when she called on Sunday evenings that I was studying, which was true in part, and in part was me not knowing how to describe what I was actually doing in terms that would make sense over the phone. She asked if I was making friends. She asked if I was eating enough. She asked about my roommate, whose name she remembered, but kept slightly wrong, calling him Brendan when his name was Brennan. I told her things were fine. They were. I just could not explain that the most important thing happening to me was happening in a room she had never seen, around equipment she did not know the name of, involving a problem she would not have been able to follow if I had tried to walk her through it. The polymer synthesis work started as a lab project for an upper division course I had placed into early. I was trying to replicate a known industrial process and getting results that were inconsistent in a way the published literature said they should not be. I spent 3 weeks assuming the inconsistency was my error. By the end of the 3rd week, I had begun to suspect it was not my error. By the end of the 4th week, I had a notebook full of data I did not know what to do with, and Dr. Vera Marsh was walking through the lab on a Saturday afternoon when I flagged her down. She sat with my notebook for a long time, not skimming it, reading it. The way you read something when you are trying to make sure you are understanding what you think you are understanding. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses, which she wore pushed slightly down her nose in a way that made her look like she was always on the verge of a question. She said, "Do you understand what this is?" I told her I thought I had found a process modification, that my results suggested a change to the reaction conditions that reduced the energy input required for a certain class of polymer synthesis, that if it was reproducible, which I had reproduced it 3 times, it might have implications for the industrial cost of making those polymers. She said, "It has implications." Yes, that is a careful way to put it. She tapped the notebook. This cuts production costs by 30 to 40% if it scales, for a class of polymers that show up in automotive parts, medical devices, and construction materials, among other things. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Is it novel?" She said, "I need to run a thorough prior art search before I can tell you for certain. But my initial read is yes. This is novel." I asked her what came next. She said, "A patent application." I was 19. I had taken one business course and I knew what a patent was in the same general way I knew what a stock was, a concept that applied to other people's situations. The word landing in connection with my lab notebook took a moment to find its shape. She said, "Don't let it overwhelm you. I'll walk you through it. The university has a process, but I want you to understand what this means before we start. If we file and the patent is granted, your name is in this permanently, not as a student who did a nice project, as an inventor of record. That is a different thing." I asked her how long the process took. She said sometimes a year, sometimes 2, sometimes longer before any commercial interest materialized. I should not expect the process to be fast or predictable. I told her I would think about it. She said, "Don't think too long. This field moves quickly." I signed the paperwork 6 weeks later, in her office, on a cold Thursday afternoon in November. I walked out to the parking lot afterward and sat in my car for 10 minutes, not going anywhere. Then I drove to the dining hall and ate a grilled cheese sandwich and did not tell anyone what I had just done. Now Paige needed $18,400 by the end of the month for the venue deposit on her wedding reception. The venue had a cancellation if she could confirm in 2 weeks. She had been planning this wedding since their father Harold died 2 years ago, and Harold had always said he would pay for it, and Harold was gone. And the money he had promised was gone with him, because Harold had spent the last 2 years of his life spending what little he had saved on medical bills that insurance had not covered. My mother told me all of this standing in the banquet hall with 47 other people in the room, her voice carrying the way it carries when she has decided that what she needs to say is more important than where she is saying it. She said Paige deserved this celebration. She said Harold would have wanted it. She said I had gotten $50,000 from the university and Paige had gotten nothing, and that was not fair, and the least I could do was give her sister the deposit. She said, "You got lucky. Your sister needs this. Give it back. Give it back." As though the university had lent me something that belonged to someone else. I said, "Mom, that's not what that money is." She said, "I know what it is. It's a scholarship. They gave it to you because you're a good student. Paige is just as smart and she didn't get any help." I looked at her. I looked at Paige, who was standing 2 feet behind our mother and who had not said a word since they walked in. Paige's expression was the expression of someone who has been told a plan and is waiting to see if the plan works. I said, "This is not the right place for this." My mother said, "There is no right place when you won't return my calls." That was not accurate. I had returned 2 of her calls in the past week. The calls had been about Paige's venue deposit, and I had told her on both calls that I could not give Paige $18,000 of money that was not discretionary. She had called 7 more times after that, and I had not answered 7 more times, because the calls were about the same thing, and my answer was the same, and I had a licensing announcement to prepare for. She reached into her purse and took out a coffee cup from the vending machine in the lobby. I had not noticed it until this moment. She had been holding it the whole time, which meant she had been holding it when they walked in, which meant she had been holding it in the car on the way here, which told me something about how the morning had been planned. She said, "You're being selfish. Your father would be ashamed." She threw the coffee at my shirt. There is a specific quality of silence that a room produces when something has happened that everyone in it understood as possible and nobody believed would actually happen. The banquet hall produced that silence in the 3 seconds after the coffee left the cup. It was not a hot cup. It was from a vending machine, and it had been in her hand for however long she had been driving to a university banquet with a plan that required a coffee cup. It was warm. It spread across the front of my white dress shirt, the one I had pressed that morning specifically for today, and it was visible from across the room. I did not step back. My body started to move backward by instinct, one foot beginning to shift, and I stopped it. Stepping back would look like retreat, and it was not retreat. I stood still. The stain spread. I looked at my mother. She was still holding the empty cup. I said nothing. Paige had not moved. She was looking at the floor. Dr. Vera Marsh was already walking toward the door. If you have ever stood in a room in a wet shirt while 47 people watched and chosen not to speak, you know what that 2 minutes felt like. Not because saying nothing was easy, because everything I could have said in that moment was smaller than what was about to be said for me. If this is landing somewhere close to something in your own history, stay with it, because what came through that door is the part that matters. Then, sophomore year, the patent application was filed in February of my sophomore year. I was listed as co-inventor alongside Dr. Vera Marsh, with the university named as co-assignee, which the IP attorney explained meant the university held rights to license the patent on behalf of the inventors and would manage the commercialization process. I would receive a share of any licensing revenue under the university's standard inventor royalty agreement, which Dr. Vera Marsh had explained to me before I signed anything. The application ran to 43 pages. I had read all of it, which took most of a Saturday, and had asked Dr. Vera Marsh questions about 6 sections. And she had answered all 6 with the patience of someone who had been through this process before and found the questions appropriate. She told me it was good practice to understand what I was signing. She said most people did not read what they signed. She said this as an observation, not a critique, but it landed as a direction. After the filing, I settled into a waiting period that the IP attorney told me could last anywhere from 18 months to 3 years before a patent decision. I continued my coursework. I continued my lab work. I did not tell my mother about the application. I almost told her at Thanksgiving of that year. I was home for the break, at the kitchen table after dinner with the remains of the meal in front of us, and she was telling Paige's boyfriend's family about Paige's event planning business, which had recently taken on its second client. She described it in careful detail, the business model, the wedding she had planned, the corporate retreat she was doing in the spring. She was proud, and the pride was visible in her voice and her posture, and the boyfriend's parents were asking the right questions, and Paige was performing the appropriate modesty about it. I had the patent application in the back of my mind the entire dinner, filed 3 weeks prior. My name in the header of a 43-page legal document. I thought about how to introduce it. I thought about what words to use. I rehearsed a version. There's something I've been working on at school that I should probably mention. I thought about my mother's face when I said it, and then I thought about what happened next. The questions she would ask that I could not yet answer because the answers depended on outcomes that had not happened yet. And I thought about the version of the story she would tell at the next family dinner before there was a full story to tell, and how that half story would be the version people knew, and how I would spend the next 18 months to 3 years correcting or updating a half story while also navigating the licensing process. Nobody asked me what I was working on. The conversation moved to dessert, and then to the football game my father Harold was watching in the other room. And then Harold came in and sat down and asked me how school was going, and I told him it was going well, and he said, "You look like you're thinking about something." And I said, "Just tired." And he nodded, which was the kind of nod he had when he knew there was more but was not going to push. Harold died the following spring. He had been sick for 2 years by then, and the last 6 months had been bad in the specific way that the last 6 months are when the illness is losing a competition with the treatment, and both of them are losing to time. I was home for the last week. I sat with him on the Thursday before he died, and we did not talk much. At one point he said, "You're going to do something." He said it without context, without completing the thought, and I did not ask him what he meant because I thought I knew, and I was not sure either of us had the language for it in that room. The patent was granted 14 months after Harold died. I read the grant notification in my dorm room at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. I called Dr. Vera Marsh. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting for it too. She said, "Congratulations, Micah." I told her thank you. She said, "Get some sleep. This is just the beginning." I sat on the edge of my bed for a while after that call, in the dark, not turning the light on. I thought about Harold's voice. "You're going to do something." He had been right. He just hadn't known the form it would take. Now, Dean Hollis entered the banquet hall in his formal university regalia at 11:29 a.m., accompanied by the general counsel from the materials company and her associate, both of whom I recognized from the licensing meetings I had attended as an observer in junior year and as a participant in senior year. He saw the room. He saw the arrangement of seats, the name placards, the faculty and students assembled. He saw me. He saw my shirt. He did not pause. He did not ask anyone what had happened. He walked to the podium with the prepared remarks he had reviewed with the licensing office last week, set them on the surface, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room with the measured expression of a man who has conducted many announcements and treats each one with the same respect. My mother was 6 feet to my left, still holding the empty cup. Dr. Vera Marsh had returned to her seat in the front row. Paige was against the far wall. The rest of the room had rearranged itself into the attentive formation of an audience that understood something official was beginning. Dean Hollis said, "Good morning. I am glad to welcome you to what I consider one of the more significant announcements this department has produced in the past decade." He introduced the licensing representatives by name and title. He explained what the university's technology transfer office did and why it existed. He talked about the gap between basic research and commercial application and how that gap was sometimes bridged, and what it took from the researcher on one end and the commercial partner on the other. He was measured and thorough, and nobody in the room moved while he spoke. Then he said, 4 years ago, a freshman student in the chemical engineering department produced research results in the polymer synthesis laboratory that his faculty advisor, Dr. Vera Marsh, recognized immediately as having commercial significance beyond the academic context in which they were produced. That student, at 19 years old, made the decision to file a patent application alongside Dr. Vera Marsh and spent the following 4 years navigating the licensing process while simultaneously completing his undergraduate degree. I want to say that last part plainly. He was going to class, completing coursework, writing his thesis, and simultaneously working with our licensing office on a commercial deal of this scope. That is not a normal undergraduate experience. It is an exceptional one. He paused. He looked directly at me. The licensing agreement between this university and Meridian Materials, finalized 6 weeks ago after 18 months of negotiation, represents the first commercial application of that research. The initial licensing payment is $50,000. Projected royalties over the 5-year term of the agreement are approximately $212,000, with options to extend. He said his remarks flat on the podium. He did not look down at them for what he said next. The student's name is Micah Wren. He files today for graduation as a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering with a cumulative GPA of 3.97. He will be continuing at this university in a postdoctoral research position beginning in the fall. The work he does in the next phase of his career will be built on a foundation he laid when he was 19 years old in a lab on the 3rd floor of this building. And I think that is worth saying out loud in a room full of people who knew him while he was building it. The room applauded. It was not a perfunctory applause. It was the kind that has weight behind it, the kind produced by people who have been told something they found impressive and are responding to the information rather than the occasion. Dr. Vera Marsh was in the front row with her hands together, and an expression I had seen once before. The night she called me to say the patent had been granted, a specific quality of satisfied that she rarely showed in professional settings, and that I understood was reserved for moments she had invested in. My mother had not moved. She was looking at the dean, then at me, then at the empty coffee cup in her right hand, then at the dean again. She said very quietly, to no one in particular, "What?" The word had no volume behind it. It was not a question to the room. It was what her mouth produced when the information she was receiving could not be reconciled with the information she had arrived with. Then, the day of filing, I remember, the morning I signed the final patent paperwork. It was a Thursday in November of my freshman year. I was sitting in Dr. Vera Marsh's office, and the IP attorney had the forms laid out on the conference table, and she walked me through each signature line, and I signed them one by one. The attorney said, "You understand that your name will appear on the issued patent as co-inventor. This is a permanent public record. Your name is in this permanently." I said I understood. I was 19. My father Harold was still alive that year. He was sick already, but not as sick as he would be, and he was still the man who sat at the head of the table at Thanksgiving and asked about school the way he always asked, with the attention he brought to things that mattered to him. I had thought about telling him. I had thought about calling him from the IP office parking lot and saying, "Dad, I did something." I thought about his voice on the phone. I decided to wait until I could say, "Dad, I did something, and here's what it became." He died before it became anything. 18 months after that November. 14 months before the patent was granted. He never knew. I have thought about that more than I have thought about most things. Not with grief exactly, more with a specific kind of clarity. The thing I made is in the permanent record. His name is not on it. Mine is. He would have been glad. Now the room finished applauding. Dr. Vera Marsh came to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She put one hand briefly on my arm, the way she had done exactly once before, the night the patent was granted, and she called me to tell me, and I had sat on the edge of my bed for a moment before I said anything back. She let go. She stayed beside me. Dean Hollis was speaking to the licensing representatives. The room had shifted into the networking energy of a formal event after an announcement. People moving toward each other with the specific purpose of conversations they had been planning. My mother was still in the same position. The cup was still in her hand. She was looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as someone recalculating, running the same numbers repeatedly because the output is not what the input should produce. Paige had moved. She was 2 feet further back than she had been, and she was looking at the floor, and she had not looked up since Dean Hollis said my name. I walked toward my mother, not because I was ready, because she was in the middle of a room with 60 people in it who had just heard everything, and she was holding an empty coffee cup, and whatever she needed to say, she should say to me rather than to the licensing representatives from Chicago. She looked up when I reached her. She said, "I didn't know." I told her I knew she hadn't. She said, "Nobody told me anything. How was I supposed to know?" I told her she was right that nobody had told her. I told her that had been my choice. I told her I had made it 4 years ago for reasons I understood, and that I was not going to pretend the choice had no cost, but that the cost and the reason were both mine. She said, "You let me walk in here thinking you had a scholarship." I told her I had not known she was coming. She looked at the stain on my shirt. The coffee had dried into the fabric by now, a brown spread across the front left of the chest, clear and permanent. She looked at it the way you look at something you have done that cannot be undone, when the thing is right in front of you and you cannot look somewhere else. She said, "Micah, I'm sorry about the shirt." I told her the shirt was fine. I told her it was not fine, but that it was the shirt I was going to be wearing when I received my certificate in 2 hours, and that was also fine. She held the empty cup. She had been holding it so long, I thought it might be the last thing she let go of. Then she set it on the registration table next to the faculty name tags. She said, "I didn't know what you had made." I told her that was true. She said, not asking, "You've been working on this since your first year." I said yes. She looked at the podium where Dean Hollis had spoken and at the banquet room generally, and then back at me. There was something working in her face that was not any single thing I had a word for. Not remorse exactly. Not pride exactly. Something more complicated than either, the specific expression of a person whose model of a situation has been replaced in real time with a different, larger version and is still adjusting to the dimensions. She said, "Your father would have been proud." The sentence hit differently than when she had used Harold's name earlier in the morning. The earlier use had been a weapon aimed to wound. "Your father would be ashamed of what you're doing right now." This one was just true. She said it the way you say a true thing when the truth is the only thing left. I told her I knew that. She and Paige left the banquet hall at 11:47 a.m. I watched them go. Paige paused at the door and looked back at me once, and her expression was an apology in the form of a face, and I nodded at her, which was all I had in that moment. The formal lunch began. I sat at the table with Dr. Vera Marsh and the licensing representatives, and Professor Kalos and two of my classmates, and the conversation was about the research and the deal and what came next. And I was present for it in the way I am present for things that matter. The shirt was on my body the whole time. Nobody mentioned it after the dean's remarks. Nobody needed to. Subscribe to Family Secret Tales. There are more stories like this one, and they all begin in the same place, with someone deciding they know what another person has and reaching for it. They are always working with incomplete information. My mother left the banquet at 11:47. She left before the formal lunch, before the certificates were distributed, before Dr. Vera Marsh and I had our photograph taken with Dean Hollis and the licensing representatives for the university's communications materials. She left with Paige, who paused at the door and looked back at me once before they went through it. I do not know what they said to each other in the car. My mother called me 3 times over the following week. The first call came the evening of the banquet. After the ceremony, after the photographs, after the licensing representatives had taken me and Dr. Vera Marsh to dinner at a restaurant near the university where I ate a steak I had not earned yet and listened to the general counsel describe the projected production timeline. I saw the call come in while we were eating, and I let it go to voicemail and did not listen to the voicemail until the following morning. She said she had not known. She said she was sorry. She said she wished I had told her. She said Harold would have been proud, which was the second time she had said this in a day, and the repetition told me she was holding on to it, that it was the one thing she had found that was true on both sides of the morning. I listened to it twice. I deleted it. She called again 2 days later. I picked up on the third ring. She started with the same place she had started in the voicemail, and I let her find her way through it without interrupting. She was not blaming me this time. She was not positioning herself as wronged. She was a woman who had walked into a room with a plan and had the plan collapse in front of 60 people she had never met. And she was processing it in the way she processed things, which was slowly and out loud. She said she had looked up the patent. She had searched my name the way I had told her it was searchable. She said it was strange to see my name on something like that. Strange was the word she used. Strange. Not impressive. Not proud of you. Not sorry I didn't know. Strange, which I think was the most honest word she had available for what it felt like to discover that your son had been doing something significant for 4 years in a room you had never seen. I told her I understood strange. She asked if she could come to the graduation ceremony that afternoon. I told her yes. I told her the ceremony started at 3, and the ticket I had originally allocated for her was still at the box office. She came. She sat in the 3rd row with Paige beside her. When my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my degree and shake the provost's hand, I looked out at the audience the way you look when you are crossing a stage and the room is full of people and the light is in your eyes, and I found her face in the 3rd row. She was not crying. She was watching with an expression that I did not know how to name precisely. Something between attending and witnessing. Something that looked like she was trying to memorize what she was seeing in case she needed it later. I nodded at her from the stage. She nodded back. After the ceremony, in the reception outside the hall, she found me in the crowd and she hugged me in the way she had not hugged me since Harold's funeral. With both arms and actual pressure, and without the one shoulder reserve she had defaulted to in recent years. She said into my shoulder, "I am proud of you." Not the complicated proud, not the conditional proud, just that. I held on to it. Paige called 2 weeks after the banquet. She called me directly, her own phone, without routing through our mother, which was a choice that cost her something and which I noted. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known what the money was, that her mother had described it as a scholarship, and she had accepted that description because she had needed to accept it, and she understood now that the need to accept it had led her to not ask the questions she should have asked. She said this carefully, in the measured way of someone who has thought about exactly how to put a thing. I told her I appreciated the call. She asked if the venue had worked out. She said they had found a different one. Smaller than the first, but it was on the grounds of an old estate, and Paige liked it better, actually, now that she had been there. She said, "Dad would have been proud, Micah." I told her I knew. She said, "You know what the weird part is? I think he probably already knew you were going to do something like this. He always talked about you like the results were already in." I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "He told me I was going to do something. One of the last times I saw him. He just said it. You're going to do something." Paige was quiet. Then she said, "That sounds exactly like him." It did. It was exactly like him. He was right, and he did not live to see the evidence, which is the way some things go, and which I have made my peace with in the years since, though peace is a word that understates the texture of it. 2 years later, I have an office at the university. Postdoctoral research position. Second year. The office is small, a shared space with 2 other researchers. But I have a section of wall above my desk that is mine. On that wall, I have the patent certificate, framed, and beside it I have the white dress shirt in a display frame, the kind people use for sports jerseys. The stain is still visible, a brown spread across the front left of the chest, dry now, permanent. I did not frame it because of what my mother did. I framed it because it is the shirt I was wearing when Dean Hollis said my name out loud to a room full of people for the first time in connection with the thing I had made. When people come into the office and ask about the shirt, I tell them it is from my graduation day. Most of them leave it there. A few of them ask why the shirt has a stain. I tell them someone spilled coffee on me. That is accurate. I am on a call when the afternoon light hits the frame at the right angle and the stain shows clearly through the glass. I do not look at it during the call. I know it is there. My name is on the patent. That is enough.